So, as Beth described in the call to worship, this summer we're going to be thinking about and focusing on different family movies and what those movies can teach us, what they have to say to us no matter what our age about life and about faith and about who we are and who we are called to be. And as you saw from the moment of preparation, this week we're focusing on Toy Story, and it's getting a bit more of a full presentation in the course of this service and this sermon than some of the subsequent movies might, and it's because we didn't have a chance to show it in its entirety. Many of you have probably seen it, and many of you are probably familiar with this cast of characters. If you're really familiar with Toy Story, you know that this is cheating, and this is from a later Toy Story movie because it features characters like Jessie the cowgirl, who were not in the original Toy Story movie. And I know there's some Toy Story fans who would have caught that. But this cast of characters has become beloved, has become the center of not one but 3 movies, and there's rumors of a 4th Toy Story movie being made. And in case you haven't seen it yet, throughout the course of the sermon, there are 2 characters you really will need to know. And so just so that you know as you're listening, they are Buzz Lightyear and Woody. And this is so you can sort of get them in your head. There's Buzz. You saw him fly or fall with style in the opening clip. And then Woody, who we're introduced to as Andy's favorite toy. Andy is the little boy protagonist of the movie, although he doesn't factor into the movies very much. Most of the movie is about what happens to his toys when he's not around. But when we meet Woody at the beginning of the movie, he is Andy's favorite toy, and he is incredibly secure in his place as Andy's favorite toy. The clip that you saw was taking place during Andy's birthday party, so he's just received Buzz Lightyear as a new gift at his birthday from his mother. And the children come running into Andy's room, and all the toys have to go back to being toys. And they run in a big whirlwind, and then they leave something on the bed, knocking Woody off the bed, which is his special spot as the favorite toy. Knocking Woody off the bed, in the process, knocking him underneath it. And so that's where we picked up when you see the other toys coming out and saying, "Woody, who's up there with you?" And Woody peeks out from under the bed. And we begin to see this shifting dynamic where the other toys are really taken with this Buzz Lightyear, who doesn't realize that he is a toy. So you could tell from their first exchange that although the other toys understand that they are toys, they talk about being from Singapore or from Taiwan or from China. They ask what company made him and say that they're from Play School or Mattel. But Buzz Lightyear says that he's from the Gamma Quadrant up in space and gives the rundown from the back of his box about that he's there to defeat the evil Emperor Zurg and his ship is broken. And despite Woody continuing to say, "You are a toy, and these are Andy's toys," when we meet Buzz Lightyear, he really doesn't understand that. So this week I've been thinking about Toy Story, which I've seen a number of times, and you might have too, thinking about what new lessons there are in it. What does it have to say to us right now? But over the course of this week, as I've been thinking about Toy Story, I've also been thinking about pictures like this one, or like this one, or like this one. Over the course of this week, I've been thinking about the interaction between this movie for children, with its lighthearted feel, and the real weight of what's happening at the border of our country, the real weight of what's happening to other people's children. And I've been thinking about a poem by the British Somali poet Warsan Shire. There's an excerpt of it here, but I'd like to take a moment and share it with you in its entirety. Some of you are probably familiar with it, but it's been speaking to me this week as I've thought both about Buzz and Woody and about these children whose names we don't know, but whose faces we've started to see. So hear these words. This is the poem entitled Home. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbors running faster than you. The boy you went to school with who kissed you dizzy behind the old tin factory is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one would leave home unless home chased you, fire under feet, hot blood in your belly. It's not something you ever thought about doing, and so when you did, you carried the anthem under your breath, waiting until the airport toilet to tear up the passport and swallow each mouthful of paper, making it clear you would not be going back. You have to understand, no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. Who would choose to spend days and nights in the stomach of a truck unless the miles traveled meant something more than the journey? And no one would choose to crawl under fences or be beaten until your shadow leaves you, forced to the bottom of the boat because you are darker, or be sold or starved, to be pitied, to lose your name, to lose your family, to make a refugee camp a home for a year or 2 or 10, to find prison everywhere. And if you survive and you are greeted on the other side with go home blacks, go home refugees, go home dirty immigrants, asylum seekers sucking our country dry of milk, look what they've done to their own countries, what will they do to ours? The dirty looks in the street, softer than a limb torn off, the indignity of everyday life, more tender than 14 men who look like your father, insulting you. Insults easier to swallow than rubble. For now, forget about pride. Your survival is more important. I want to go home. But home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. And no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore, unless home tells you to leave what you could not behind, even if it was human. No one leaves home until home is a damp voice in your ear saying, leave, run now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here. So that poem has been running through my thoughts. It's been the backdrop to the movie Toy Story for me, and I've thought about what is it that these two things have to say to each other? What is it that the movie Toy Story has to say to us where we are right now? What does it have to say to us as we, of people of faith, grapple with the reality that we are being told over and over again that it is biblical to take children from their parents, that it is acceptable to separate them for the national security of our country? I thought long and hard about where in the Bible that might be found, and the only place I could come up with was when Herod does it. And I'm pretty sure Herod's not the person that we're supposed to emulate. And so I thought more about what it is in the Bible that speaks to us in this moment, and I came up with this piece of scripture that Beth read earlier today from someone who I think we are supposed to emulate, from Jesus. And this is the scene when the people are bringing their children to Jesus to bless them, and Jesus and the disciples have been so busy. They've been traveling, they've been all over Galilee, they are weary, and the disciples, who we know are not bad or bad-hearted people, they put up a wall. They misunderstand what Jesus would want, and they tell those families to go away, to take their children away, because Jesus is too busy. And when Jesus finds out that this has happened, he's upset with his disciples. And he says to them, "Let the little children come to me, and do not stop them. For it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs." Let the little children come to me, and do not stop them. Where there was a wall put up between him and the children, he takes it down. He creates access. He creates space. He creates a place of love, connection, and security. And that's what I think our faith is calling us to do. That's what I think we're here about. Never mind the fact that It has never been the case in our nation that we have decided the laws of our nation by what the Bible tells us to do. But because that's the public conversation, I think it's worth going there. I think it's worth restating that this is what our faith is about. Our faith is about a kingdom of God that is broad, expansive, loving, and inclusive. Our faith is about taking down barriers and creating access. In this case, to Jesus, but to God, and to one another, and to love. And so as I thought about that, I realized Toy Story can teach us some very valuable things about where we are right now as a people, as a nation, as a world. It can teach us some really important lessons. And so the first one that I thought about was the reality that sometimes we all put up walls even before we realize that we're doing it. Take a look at Woody's face right there. He is not pleased. This is the end of the clip you just saw where he says, "I'm still Andy's favorite toy." It's important to us to maintain our place in the world. It doesn't make us bad people. It doesn't make Woody a bad character. In fact, the first times I watched this movie, my sympathy was kind of always with Woody. What would it feel like to suddenly be displaced and have all your friends kind of abandon you? And then there's a whole part in the middle where they don't trust him and they think he's killed Buzz and all of this. And he hasn't. But Woody is on a journey. But I came to watch it this time with a different eye, an eye for a sympathy for Buzz as well. What it is to show up in a strange place and not understand how you fit into it. But like Woody, I think we sometimes all put up walls even before we realize we've done it. Woody doesn't set out to have animosity with Buzz. At the beginning, he says, "Let's just go up on the bed and give whoever's up there a big Andy's room welcome." The problem becomes when suddenly he feels his place begin to shift. If there's room made on the bed for Buzz, does that mean there isn't room for Woody? And in fact, at one point, there isn't. Woody gets put in a toy box at night, and Andy takes Buzz as his favorite toy to go to bed. That can be scary and unsettling. We hear that talk, that rhetoric. We heard it in the poem. We hear it in national conversation. Maybe there's not enough to go around. Maybe there isn't enough space. In the poem, she writes, "Look what they've done to their own countries. What will they do to ours?" That fear, those walls, that worry that if we open up space, we might stand to lose something. The disciples, they put up a wall before they even realized that they had done it. What was their fear? They were tired, they were anxious, they didn't want Jesus to be upset with them. Maybe they misunderstood. They thought he would want them to hold space around him. And what we see time and time again in our faith is, it's okay. Break down that wall that you've built. Take a risk. Reach out to someone else. Create space. But the truth is, sometimes we put up walls before we really realize that we've done it. Toy Story taps into that in us. We understand that feeling that Woody feels, and it helps us to enter into the rest of the story. It helps us to come to this next lesson, which I picked up this week, which is sometimes being separated from what is familiar makes us vulnerable. And with this one, there is a little movie clip I'd like to show you, especially if you haven't seen what precedes this scene. And so this is where my trusty assistants are going to shift between. But I invite you to see this movie clip as Buzz sort of comes to the realization that he's not in the world he thought he was.
Calling Buzz Lightyear. Come in, Buzz Lightyear. This is Star Command. Buzz
Star
Lightyear,
Command.
do you read me?
Buzz Lightyear responding. Read you loud and clear.
Buzz Lightyear, planet Earth needs your help.
On the way.
Buzz Lightyear, the world's greatest superhero, now the world's greatest toy. Buzz has it all. Locking wrist communicator.
Calling Buzz Lightyear.
Karate chop action.
Wow.
Pulsating laser light.
Total annihilation.
Multi-phase voice simulator.
Is a secret mission in uncharted space. Is a secret mission in uncharted
And
space.
best of all, high-pressure space wings.
To infinity and beyond.
Not a flying toy.
Get your Buzz Lightyear action figure and save the galaxy near you. Buzz Lightyear.
Available at all Al's Toy Bound outlets in the Tri-County area.
Out among the stars I sail, way beyond the moon. In my silver ship I sail, a dream it ended too soon. Now I know exactly who I am and what I'm here for.
You are a toy you can't fly.
And I will go sailing no more. But no, it can't be true. I could fly if I wanted to, like a bird in the sky. If I believed I could fly, why I'd fly.
To infinity and beyond.
Clearly, I will go sailing no more.
Mom.
So that's without a doubt the saddest scene in the movie Toy Story. But thinking about the reality that when we are separated from what is familiar, we feel vulnerable. The children, the families at our country's borders are separated not only from what is familiar to them, their home, but from one another. So just as we can understand that human feeling that Woody feels, that we put up walls when we feel afraid or we feel anxious or worried about those who are different from us, we can tap into that feeling of vulnerability. We know what it is to feel afraid. We know what it is to suddenly find ourselves on uneven ground and not on sure footing. Just like Buzz, who thought he understood the world he was in, suddenly he's in a world where it's not flying, it's falling with style. And he's not really stationed in the Gamma Quadrant, he's really Andy's toy. And in this case, he's not even in Andy's house, he's in the home of Sid, the boy next door, who is known for torturing toys. We can understand that feeling of vulnerability. And again, we can hear Jesus' call to us. Connect with one another. In those vulnerable places, in your humanity, offer love, make space, be expansive and generous in your care. I want to read to you one other piece. This is from a friend of mine. She is an attorney who works with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so she and her colleagues are, in a very real sense, living what we're seeing on the news in real time as they work with these families who have come to our country. As I read this to you, I invite you to enter into the sense of vulnerability, being separated from what is familiar. And tap into a time when you felt that or known that feeling. Here's what my friend Michelle writes about her experience. After a 1,500-mile trek from Honduras, Moises and his 6-year-old son, Carlos, crossed the border together in May. Immigration officials stopped them near McAllen, Texas. After only a few hours together in custody, immigration officials took the boy without warning to a separate area and placed him in a cage. Moises was handcuffed and taken away too, and they never had a chance to say goodbye. When I met Moises this week, on the other side of a glass partition in a small meeting room at Stewart Detention Center in the tiny town of Lumpkin, Georgia, some 1,000 miles from the US-Mexico border, we sat and talked. This detention center in Lumpkin, Georgia is one of the remote places where I am meeting those who have no other champion. Across the partition, he sobbed for a full 15 minutes. Witnessing his suffering was without question the most difficult moment of my legal career. Clutching his Bible, he broke down as he described how his son was pulled away from him. So far, he's been unable to reunite with or even see his son. He was only told that Carlos was taken to a shelter in Texas. He desperately wanted to know how his son was doing, but he could only imagine the worst. He needs to be with his father, Moises said. It is my job to take care of him. As they closed their conversation, he said something to my friend Michelle that stuck with her. He said, "Con mi hijo me viene, and con mi hijo me voy." I came with my son, and I will leave with my son. I will never forget his words, she said, or the look on his face when he said this to me. I hope he's right. We'll do everything in our power to make sure that he is. When we're separated from what is familiar, we feel vulnerable.